Everyone, thank you for joining our webinar today where we'll discuss how to transform exemption certificate management with AI. My name is Jasmine O'Cutesy and I'll be your host. I'll review a couple quick notes before we dive in today. Friendly reminder that today's discussion is for informational purposes only and is not legal or tax advice. And on your screen is our safe harbor policy, so please take a moment to review. We're recording today's event, so if you want to listen again or share it with a colleague, you'll receive a link to the recording via email within the next 24 hours. The platform you're looking at can be customized, so feel free to move or resize the windows. And the additional resource section contains the slide deck and other related links. There are several ways to engage with presenters and fellow attendees today. So please submit any questions you have for the speakers in the Ask Questions box, and we'll be sure to get to those at the end of the webinar during the Q&A segment. You can also network with your fellow attendees today by clicking on the group chat icon at the bottom of your screen. We are offering 1 CPE credit for today's presentation. So for those looking to receive that credit today, please note that you'll need to respond to at least 3 poll questions and be present for at least 50 minutes. Once you have met the requirements, your certificate will be available to download in the Earn Certification box on your screen. Your certificate will also be available in the post-event email. So today we are joined by 2 Avalara experts. We have Greg Penhaligon, a lead product manager of ECM, and Christine Martin, the senior solution consultant. So I'll pass it over to you two to get today's discussion started. Greg, do you want to go ahead and do a quick intro for us?
I do, yeah, and I'm very impressed that you got my last name right the first time around. That's incredible. My name is Greg Penhaligon. I'm the product manager for ECM. I've been at Avalara for 7 years. Before that, I worked at various SaaS companies for maybe 15 years before that. I'm originally from San Francisco, and I currently live in Durham, North Carolina.
And I'm Christine Martin. I'm a senior solution consultant. I spent 15 years in industry as a tax manager at 3 very large companies: hospitality, telecommunications, and manufacturing. And I have been at Avalara 16 years. So I have ridden this wave an awful long time. All right, let's talk about our agenda. Today, we're going to talk about the changing landscape of tax compliance, why exemption certificates have become a C-suite concern, and I'm going to share a great story with you. I'm going to tease you a little bit with that one. The ownership problem, who's really accountable for exemption certificates, and what this path to modern scalable exemption management is. And I'm going to let Greg do a demo to show exemption certificate management and the AI component. So let's get started. So the future of tax compliance: continuous, connected, automated. There is so much, we'll call it regulatory pressure, but that Wayfair case really changed how people do business and what they have to do from an exemption perspective. And before it was, I only have to collect exemption certificates in the states that I have a physical presence in. Well, Wayfair blew that out of the water. And now states that you didn't have to do anything with, now, especially if you've got a large exempt customer base, you've got to know, hey, what certificates do I need? How long are they good for? How does that apply to transactions? Things that you never had to do before. But we're also seeing this rise in omni-channel. No longer are the days of people selling one way, through a catalog, through a store, taking orders over the phone. Now it's through marketplaces, it's through social media and e-commerce and phone apps. And from an exemption perspective, I've got to figure out how to apply an exemption certificate to all of these channels so that I'm not creating an issue for my customers. But what we're also seeing is this rise in AI and automation. How can we utilize AI to be able to make this process of collecting and managing exemption certificates easier and reduce risks at the same times? So this shift is already starting. We're already seeing ways to automate this collection management and really help these disconnected teams work together. So the question that I would ask you all is your compliance model built for 2026 and the future, or are you still way back from when I was started my career? So some things that CFOs should expect from tax technology in the next 5 years. Let's talk about the old model. When I started my career, we had exemption certificates stored in binders. My first audit with the telephone company, I went into that room to find the exemption certificates. I spent hours looking through binders because everybody had their way of storing those and filing those exemption certificates. And if I couldn't find them, then I'd call the customers. And I would spend weeks and weeks looking for exemption certificates. And I'll give you a true example. When I worked for the hospitality company, the auditor would say, hey, I need to see this exemption certificate for this guest from one night. And if we couldn't find the certificate, we'd call the hotel. You remember that one guy that stayed for one night 4 years ago? I need that piece of paper. So not super efficient. And we just knew that in every audit, we were going to pay an exemption for missing exemption certificates. And we were so reactive to what the auditor wanted instead of being active and trying to manage certificates. We had a lean staff at the telephone company, and we just weren't going out and getting new certificates. It was just you collect it, it was one and done. And really now what we're seeing is different expectations. People want this integration with the tax engine. They want this cross-functional experience that maybe sales is involved, maybe operations is involved, but have this continuous process to be able to collect certificates, but not just collect them once and be done, but collect them and manage them and make it an entire process and use some automation in this entire process. And that's really the purpose of tax technology. It should reduce your exposure and free up your time. If I just can't even imagine trying to manage the hordes of exemption certificates I had at the telephone company. I mean, trying to renew those Florida resale certificates every single year, that just would have been impossible. So this is where embracing tax technology becomes important. And I think about the history of Avalara. 22 years ago, Avalara was this first cloud platform for tax compliance. And back then, we were trying to convince people that you should go to the cloud. And I remember so many conversations of people saying, I don't want my stuff on the cloud. I don't trust it. Somebody's going to capture my data, whatever, there's going to be a data breach. And today, when I talk to people, I don't know of anybody that still has their data not in the cloud. So over 22 years, we've seen this shift. Well, now we're starting to see this shift in additional technology with AI. So we've got our first poll question. How are you currently managing exemption certificates? And Greg, I'm going to go out on a limb and I'm going to say, and everybody can pick multiple choices out here, I'm going to say B, partially automated with internal tools is going to be our top answer. What do you think?
I think that's a great guess.
Using a dedicated ECM, the not sure one. That one, I'm going to be really surprised if people pick this one. So we'll give everybody a little bit longer to see what those answers are, but I'm definitely going with B is going to be the high one. Let's see. All right, let's give it 3, 2, 1. Am I right? Look at that. Partially on 7.3%, not sure. Some folks are using an outsourced third party. Very nice. Look at this, and using a dedicated solution and fully manual at 22%. Those two are pretty close. Well, hopefully those fully manual people get some actionable items out of this webinar. All right, let's keep going. So who owns the exemption certificate process? And this one is so fascinating to me. I'm on calls every single day with customers and prospects. And I always ask the question, tell me about your exemption certificate process. And really where people go to is, oh, this is where I store them. But I want to know further upstream, who's responsible for collecting them? And this is always just fascinating to me because sometimes it's the salesperson that gets it, who then gives it to customer service, who then gives it to accounting, who then gives it to tax. And I worked for a CIO years ago that said, humans are bad, humans make mistakes. So anytime you've got all these humans that are touching this piece of paper, there is certainly the aptitude for something to fall by the wayside and get lost. So the tax people say, hey, this is an IT problem when there's data that's just not right or it's not capturing the information. The operations people say, hey, sales, you're the one that's the problem because you guys aren't getting these forms from your customers. IT's like, hey, sorry, this is out of scope. We don't do anything with exemption certificates. And then sales say, this is a tax problem because orders get delayed because there's no exemption certificates. So it's like everybody's pointing the finger at everybody else and saying, hey, it's not my problem. And really, ownership becomes unclear. And I certainly experienced this when I was in industry. When I worked for the paper manufacturer, some plants collected the exemption certificates. Sometimes they sent them to me. Sometimes they held on to them. Trying to find them under audit was an absolute nightmare. And I mean, that's just the collection of them, but then the management of it. How do you manage them? How do you even know what you have? We used to get copies of people's business licenses, driver's licenses. I've seen social security cards come in as what people think are exemption certificates. And having a clear, defined owner and service level agreements of, hey, I'm going to get this certificate. I'm going to mark them as exempt. I'm going to review this and give feedback to the customer. Certainly helps the customer experience. It helps accounting. It helps sales. But really having somebody that owns this process becomes important. So we got our next poll question. What's your biggest challenge with exemption certificates? Oh, Greg, what do you think? Collecting them, tracking them?
Yeah, I hear collecting them is a bear. Getting everybody to respond when you need them to is difficult.
I'm going to go with D, storing and retrieving certificates for audit, because that's where I literally would spend weeks tracking the certificates that I had in an Excel spreadsheet, how many times I called a customer. I spent so much time doing that, but that was a long time ago. So maybe it's a little bit different now. Maybe it's just the collection of them. Especially, again, going back to the Wayfair thing, maybe just collecting certificates because I got to collect them in more states now. I don't know. Let's see. All right, let's see these results. 3, 2, 1. Oh, Greg, you were absolutely right. Collecting them. Interesting that 12% of people are only saying that retrieving them for an audit, but tracking exemption certificates and renewals, absolutely. Keeping up with this change. This is interesting results. Very, but yeah, collecting from customers. I get it.
This is great because we've got automated solutions for all these.
All right, let's keep going. So let's break down these silos between tax, finance, sales, operation, IT, all of this piece of this. So sales reps onboarding customers. Imagine that you've got a sales rep and maybe he's got an iPad or his computer with him and he's actually taking an order sitting in a customer's office and saying, hey, before I place this order, you told me that you're tax exempt. Let's get this exemption certificate process rolling. And maybe he just turns his computer around and shares a website where they can create an exemption certificate. Or I think of the frequently asked questions website, that on your website somewhere, this is where we bring IT into the mix, that maybe IT is sitting out here and says, hey, let's add a page so that customers can be proactive with their exemption certificate management. And they click on a website and they can create an exemption certificate. Or even if you've got a customer portal, you could actually give some visibility to your customers to let them self-manage their exemption certificates, that they can see the certificates that are on file, they can see the certificates that are about to expire, and they can create that exemption certificate even before it expires. And this financial gap that we've seen with missing certificates, those audit assessments. Let's talk about the audit assessments. I kind of teased this at the beginning. But I was with a group of folks the other night having dinner, and I was with a pretty large retailer that sells sporting goods. And he said, "Hey, can you guys help us with exemption certificates? We got a really big problem." And I was like, "Well, tell me about your problem." They had a state, I don't remember which state it was, audit them, and there was a sample. Well, this auditor just so happened to pick a day where one cashier on every single transaction hit the tax exempt button. And that resulted in a $300,000 audit assessment. They literally had a 100% error factor because that one cashier on every single transaction pressed that button. So they actually spent an awful lot of time going through and looking, trying to find the root cause of this. And literally it came down to one person. And one of the other things that they said was, hey, we know that we're not doing a good job of training people. So from a financial perspective, they took a pretty big hit for all of these missing exemption certificates and this error factor that went into their audit. So just having something in place so that you're not paying $300,000 and expecting a cashier to not press a certain button. Just a fascinating story that I had never heard. In all of my years, I've never heard of somebody just pressing that button. I've heard that in some POS systems that you can make it so that a manager is the one that has to press this button. So my guess is this sporting goods retailer probably put some changes in place so that not every cashier could exempt a transaction. But we also want to make sure that we close this customer gap. And I have heard so many times that, hey, we know this customer is exempt, but we're not going to release this order until we get an exemption certificate because I may not ever get that certificate again. So that then becomes this customer service thing where the customers are mad because they're not getting their product, but they're not the ones that need it aren't the ones that get the exemption certificate. And it just becomes an absolute mess. So giving your customers a better experience. Think of, again, going into a retail store and saying, hey, I'm tax exempt. How do you not degrade the exemption or the customer experience in the store while still keeping yourself safe by collecting an exemption certificate? Because we certainly know that from a retail perspective and an online retail perspective, that customer experience is so important. If you make it so hard for somebody to buy tax exempt, maybe they're just not going to buy from you and they'll go somewhere else to where they don't have to jump through all of those hoops. But the fix isn't a better spreadsheet or more people. It's shared responsibility. It's a standard central source of truth and a system of record that you've got to have where all exemption certificates exist. And those exemption certificates and the data that's associated with those exemption certificates can interact in this omni-channel world that we live in today. And make sure that you also don't get those business licenses and driver's licenses and those things that really aren't applicable. So the days of manual exemption certificate management is dead. So think of all of these certificates that are stored in shared folders on your hard drive, which gives me so much pain to think about, in filing cabinets. I was actually talking with one of our partners that had boxes of exemption certificates in their attic, and they were moving, had family members come help them move their offices. And somebody, one of their family members, was looking through this box and saw these pieces of paper that were dated like 10 years ago. So they got rid of the box. This partner happened to be under audit in the state of California. They went to go find the box of exemption certificates, asked their family member, hey, what happened to those boxes that were in the attic? And the family member said, yeah, we threw them away. They looked really old. And all of those exemption certificates were gone. So this manual process of storing them in binders and boxes on hard drives, in email folders, on customer records, really is this sign to say, hey, maybe there's a better way to do this. There's some automation that can happen. If you don't have automation in this exemption certificate management piece, maybe now is the time. Or maybe you've paid $300,000 to a state because somebody pressed that exempt button and exempted every single transaction. So what comes next? What does good look like in exemption certificate management? And this is where I think AI comes into play. And I know that there is so much anxiety around AI that AI is going to take my job, but I think about things like Ford and how they changed the manufacturing process with the assembly line. It didn't take people's jobs, it's just changed how people did their jobs, and maybe it created new jobs. And that's really what we're thinking about with AI. We're not taking somebody's job because, let's be honest, there's not too many people that their sole job is exemption certificate management. We're just making it easier for companies to manage this onerous process better. And we want this to be an intelligent way to manage this process with high volumes, especially in manufacturing and retail and even distribution. And we want this to be proactive. No longer are those days where the auditor says, hey, where's this exemption certificate? I got to go find this. It should all be at your fingertips. So I think this question no longer is, should we automate? But the better question is, how much risk are we carrying and why aren't we automating? So we got another poll question. Let's get there. What level of automation do you currently use for exemption certificate validation? Basic checks, moderate automation, advanced automation. Greg, I'm going with A. A is my answer that I think would be the top one.
I got to back you up there. I think A is the right one.
Interesting. Not sure. That could be another. I would love to talk to the people that have some advanced automation with real-time validation. Maybe that's in a shopping cart. I think that's such a fantastic idea. All right, let's get there in 3, 2, 1. Look at that. We're kind of smarter than we think sometimes. It's a fully manual review. And not sure. Look at that. We've got 10% of folks that responded say that they've got some real-time validation. That is awesome. I love hearing that people are coming into this automated world to be able to manage this process. All right, let's keep going. So why should exemption certificate management be a C-level conversation? Well, audit liability. Imagine going to your boss and saying, hey, I've got this audit assessment for $300,000 because that one cashier in one store. I think about my time at the paper manufacturer. When I first started, one of the things that we put together every single quarter was what our future audit liability was so that we could book an expense every single month rather than taking a $300,000 hit. And I went through and did a quick sample. Hey, here's my exempt sales. Let me see if I could find them. And my future audit liability calculation was really high. And I gave it to our executive and he was like, this is absolutely unacceptable, Christine, go back to the drawing board. And I was like, but this is a real thing. If every state came in and audited every exempt record, this is where we would be. And he's like, you got to sharpen that pencil and go back to the drawing board. So from an audit liability perspective, it's absolutely a thing. There's so many states now that are hiring more auditors because more people are taxpayers. And where's that low-hanging fruit? Exemption certificates. And manufacturing, that's really big for exemption certificates. So audit liability is a thing. It is a big risk, and it absolutely can impact the bottom line. The customer experience, again, I know that everybody, especially in this retail space, is so concerned about this customer experience, but you have to be able to manage this thing between the customer experience and the risk, right? Are you willing to take on this responsibility of paying the sales tax if you don't collect an exemption certificate from a customer? to me, I almost kind of put it together like the 1099 and the W-9 piece. Are you going to pay somebody a commission without a W-9, knowing that you may never find them again? And then you've got a problem with the Internal Revenue Service. AI, I know so many companies that are working with AI. There are AI projects. A lot of them are customer facing, but they're trying to use AI more in the back office. And I really think that this AI is what's redefining the possibility of exemption and tax compliance management. All of these excess taxes, all of this penalty really needs to be accounted for and thought of. Look at audit history, look at audits prospectively as well. And just know that it could be any reason that an auditor comes out. And let's talk about the audit piece of things for a little bit. I mean, so many interesting stories. I don't want to call them great stories, but when I worked for the hospitality company, we ran a gift shop in Texas. And somebody in marketing had this great idea to put things together in this catalog so that people could buy things from the store later on. And an Indiana auditor happened to be on vacation and was in that gift shop. And he pulls up the catalog and it had our name all over it. But on the order form, it said, if shipped to Texas, add sales tax. And this auditor was like, well, that's interesting because I know they're in Indiana. He takes this catalog back with him, shows his boss. I get an audit letter. The auditor shows up and says, show me all your catalog sales. And there's me. I'm like, what catalog? And he pulls this out. And before long, I had all these states asking for what my catalog sales are. So from an audit risk, it may not be what you're doing when you're filing tax returns. It could just be this random thing that an Indiana auditor's on vacation or buys something online and says, huh, that's really weird. We should go look at this a little bit further. So always keep that in mind, that they're kind of back there lurking. This regulatory complexity is accelerating. And I say this because tax law is usually much further behind than technology. But we're also seeing that states are using AI, and now this tax law piece is keeping up with technology, that it's no longer taking 10 years for tax law to catch up. When I worked for the telephone company, VoIP was a thing, and it didn't meet the definition necessarily of telecommunications, and it took years for the states to change their definition of telecommunications to include VoIP. We're seeing this acceleration now. So keeping track of all of these things and how the states are keeping up with this becomes important. So exemption certificate management isn't just a compliance cost center. It's really an operational leverage point, if you will. So big data, big risk. Lots of data. If you've got bad data for customers, you're going to have bad data with exemptions as well. You may have duplicate accounts. You may have really old records. And let's talk about really old records. At the paper manufacturer, I was under audit. I had this list of exempt customers. I found all of those exemption certificates. And I walked into the really dark, cold room that I put the auditor in and said, here you go. And he's looking through these exemption certificates. And one of them that was 30 years old that I was so proud that we had, he put that one aside. And I was like, wait, why did you do that? Well, we had changed our name 3 times since then. And he disallowed that exemption certificate because it was issued to our old name 3 names ago. So this stale record, which I was super proud. It was actually framed and hung on the office wall for a little bit. That stale record became problematic for us. And how did we keep up with all of this? It was really hard, and we didn't do a good job of keeping up with this. So 30 miscellaneous, let's look at what this would play out in an audit. So an auditor says, hey, I've got these 100 records that I want to see exemption certificates for. Well, 30 of them don't relate to any specific customer. 15 of those are expired. 10 of them, I've got certificates for other states that I applied to the state that was being audited. I've got a 55% exposure rate that they're going to extrapolate across an entire audit period. And my audit assessment now is no longer on consumer use tax on fixed assets, but now it's because I didn't do a good job on managing my exemption certificates or renewing exemption certificates. So this really becomes an issue as you have to become a taxpayer in more and more states because of Wayfair. So there is some reality on the accounting side, not just from this tax perspective, but booking that future audit liability and how you pay for audit assessments. And technically what's supposed to happen is you only exempt transactions that you have backup documentation for. But I think through, what does an ERP system look like that doesn't have some technology and it doesn't have this automation that I can go to a customer record and I can check a box, kind of like that cashier. I can check a box and say this customer is exempt, but I don't have the ability to say this customer is exempt in this state for this period. So I then exempt that one customer in every state forever, ever, ever, and ever. And I don't have any proof that they're exempt anywhere else, only for that one state. So there are some reserves that you should be keeping on your books to cover these future audit liabilities. And how big that reserve is really impacts the bottom line. And, CFOs don't necessarily think about exemption certificates until there's a really big audit assessment or until there's a big reserve that has to be put into place. And certificate management it's not really thought of that much. It's a one and done thing typically that I've seen. That's certainly what I did when I was in industry. This is really about taxability management and about risk management. And having somebody that owns it and a CFO that says, how are we managing this risk and who's taking ownership of this? So I can look to somebody and say, tell me where we are with this. What does our risk look like? Are our audits getting any better? Can I reduce that reserve, which then helps our bottom line? So we have certainly heard through our customers and through some work that we've done with Forrester that having something in place to manage these exemption certificates takes about 416 hours. So having automation in place will save you 400 hours a year of managing exemption certificates and finding exemption certificates. So we've heard that spreadsheets just are not a scalable thing. How do we modernize this? Well, first, certificates are this ad hoc thing. They're super high risk. Nobody's necessarily collecting them every single time. Well, maybe this next step is, hey, let's manage this centrally. The tax department's going to manage this. We're going to validate those exemption certificates, but where they're stored, I don't necessarily know. So now I've got this medium risk. Well, maybe step 3 is let's automate this collection process. Now my risk is going a little bit low. Scalability is a little bit easier because now I've got tools to be able to automate the collection, the management, the storage, the proactive piece, finding them under audit. But in an ideal world, this is AI-powered compliance. Real-time AI validation, taking that human out so a human doesn't have to necessarily review this, having a central source of truth for exemption certificates, having it integrated with the tax engine. So this exemption certificate piece isn't just this standalone. It is connected to all of your tax calculations, point of sale, e-commerce, phone orders that you may take in your ERP. That is the nirvana. There's low risk. The scalability is off the charts. So most people really underestimate how much effectiveness stage 4 has on their business, from reducing their exposure, reducing the time spent managing exemption certificates as well. So make sure that you understand the rules and the regulations, that you've got a process to collect and validate those certificates. You've got a central place to store those, and you can manage that audit exposure as well. So one more poll question, Greg, we're almost to you. Let's go. Have you experienced an audit or an assessment related to exemption certificates in the past 3 years? I'm going to go with B. Yes, but minor findings or adjustments. Unless you're a retailer.
B seems like a safe bet.
Yeah. No, but we're concerned about potential risks. You know, the auditor is like the guy, the shadow that's lurking. You just never know when they're going to come. All right, let's go. 3, 2, 1. 28%. Yep, we've had some minor findings. 40. No, but we're concerned about potential risk. Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Thank you guys for doing this. So understanding this exemption certificate process, your business or your customer is exempt. Don't forget that you've got to issue exemption certificates to your vendors as well. This means that an exemption certificate is needed. So the buyer provides you with an exemption certificate. What do you do with that exemption certificate? You're going to store it someplace. You're going to mark that customer as exempt. There is a whole path and a life cycle to exemption management. So one, is your customer is exempt? Collect that exemption, or at least request that exemption certificate from them. Is that certificate valid? Is it a business license? Is it their social security card? Is it on the right form? Does it have all the information filled out? Have they signed it? Have they dated it? Flag that customer as exempt, and then store that certificate so that you can find it under audit. Flagging that customer as exempt becomes really important. I think of states like California, where agricultural exemptions and manufacturing exemptions aren't 100% exempt. They're only partially exempt. So think about how you would do that in your system. So we worked with Forrester to put together a total economic impact of automating sales tax compliance and what sales tax looks like to your business. And this was based on customer interviews. We put together a composite company and said, hey, based on all of this information, by automating and using technology, you're going to see 153% ROI. You're going to get your money back in less than 6 months. And over a period of 3 years, you're going to save about $700,000. So we certainly have the Forrester report available for you if you want to look at this. But there's so many benefits to technology that we have recognized with our customers and this composite company on how you can save money and that ROI, the investment in technology and the ROI that you receive. So we have certainly seen that the financial impact is about $96,000 over 3 years. That relates to poor exemption certificate management. And there are some efficiencies that you can get, that everything is organized, everything is in one place, that it's connecting with this omni-channel world that we live in as well. But I've said an awful lot in the last 35 minutes. Greg, I want you to show them the magic of exemption certificate management in this AI world that we live in.
I'll do it. Thank you, Christine. And hello, everyone. Again, my name is Greg Penhaligon. I'm the product manager for Avalara Exemption Certificate Management, or ECM. Thank goodness for acronyms. So our goal for ECM is to automate as much of the exemption certificate management process as possible. We want to kind of reclaim the time you're currently spending keeping track of which certificates are expiring, and then sending out requests for the replacements, and then reviewing the new certificates as they come in to ensure they're valid. You've all got much better things to do with your time. So we're taking advantage of this AI revolution to automate as much of this process within ECM as possible. And one of the most exciting new features we built along these lines is our AI-powered certificate validation assistant. So this is a new tool specifically for helping you manage documents like the hundreds of Florida resale PDFs and images that can't be created digitally. So your customers are emailing you images and PDF files. And it used to be that you'd have to perform data entry for these certificates. You'd have to type all that information into your system, and then you or your employees would have to eyeball the certificate, and you hope you catch the fact that they forgot to enter a taxpayer ID, so the certificate actually is invalid, and you need to request a new one, and you'd actually have to do that requesting step manually as well. Or maybe it was a good certificate and you saved it as valid before moving on to the next one. Our new validation assistant can now take care of all of that for you for the majority of common certificates out there. And I'm going to show you what that looks like in just a bit. And then we have a load of other cool new features as well. We've got certificate requests, which monitor all the certificates in your ECM account. It's looking for ones that are expired or expiring soon or invalid, or maybe you have customers with missing certificates and it'll send out the request for you. It can even send out follow-up requests automatically if your customers don't respond to the initial request. It's got great reporting tools. For as powerful as it is, it's very easy. It's a very easy application to learn, so it makes onboarding new employees really easy. It's deeply integrated with Avatax, as Christine said. So if you're also an Avatax user, you'll find this really valuable. When you receive a certificate from one of your customers and you save it to your ECM account, it will automatically and instantly create the appropriate exemption in Avatax for that customer. It works with other tax engines if you prefer using a lesser tax engine. I don't know why you do that, but you could. Or you could use it without a tax engine as just a standalone certificate management tool. But it does work especially well with Avatax. And if you manage communication certificates, we're just about to launch a new integration with our Avalara for Communications product. We have ECM commerce integration. I could go on and on, but you kind of get the point. Now, ECM comes in 3 different versions. The most basic version is ECM Essentials. That allows you to create exemptions in Avatax. In fact, the Essentials version only works with Avatax. And with Essentials, you don't get the AI and automation features. Next, we have ECM Pro, which is probably the best solution for most customers. It has all the automation and all the AI. It's more configurable than Essentials. It has a number of bulk management tools that allow you to make changes in bulk to your customers and certificates if you've got a high volume of certificates. It does support third-party tax engines as well as e-commerce integrations if you want to allow your customers to apply a certificate within a shop cart or something like that. And then ECM Premium can be used by anyone, but it's kind of geared towards enterprise customers that require the ability to do a lot of customizing and configuring within the product, or maybe customers with very complicated workflows. Maybe your customers have multiple ship-to locations, or you have a number of retail locations to support. If you have a large team of employees who review your incoming certificates because your certificate volume is very high, these are the kind of things that ECM Premium was built to address. All right, for goodness sakes, let's get to the demo. So let me see if I can share my screen here.
And well, hang on while you do that. We got one more poll question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, we'll save this poll question for later. Go ahead.
All right. Here we go. Share my screen. Can you do it, everybody? Yes, there we go. Can you see that, Christine?
Oh, can I? Maybe not. Oh, there we go. Got it.
There we go. Okay, thank you so much for that. Okay, so I'm going to log into my Avalara account, and once this logs me in, come on, Internet. Tell you what, I'm going to try one more time. Hang on. They say never do a live demo.
And while that loads, Christine, I saw a lot of questions come in from the audience. So if you want to take some of those while we wait.
Sure. One of the questions was, does Avalara handle drop shipments and also when states accept other state certificates? What a fantastic question. Drop shipments to me are like the Bermuda Triangle of sales tax. So you can actually, in the exemption certificate platform, you can say, hey, drop ship, and all the states that accept a home state certificate are automatically populated and tagged to that one exemption certificate image. Let's see what else we got. If there is an audit, is there a report generated to export all exemption certificates on file in a bulk download for the auditor? Oh my gosh, yes. So let's talk about this one for a second, because this to me is like the sun comes out and there's rainbows and unicorns. So if the auditor says, here's the customers that I want to see a certificate for, you can actually go through and filter, and I can literally find 250 exemption certificate images in a second and then export them to a zip file and give them to the auditor. No longer spending weeks going through looking for it.
Okay, I overcame my tech hurdles here and I'm in ECM. If you look over on the left here, this item here where it says transactions, that's Avatax. And right next to it underneath where it says exemptions, that is the ECM product. And just to expedite things, I'm gonna go straight to the incoming certificates page. So this is where you'd see any new certificates your customers have sent you. But in this case, let's imagine that a customer's emailed me a certificate, and I'm going to click the add a certificate button. And I'm gonna drag this dreaded Florida resale certificate into this window. There we go. Now at this point, ECM is doing two things. The first thing it's doing is it's figuring out which certificate this is. And once it's done that, it can extract all the required information from the certificate, and it can pre-populate all the fields you see on the right for you. So you see here, it's entered the state and it's entered the exemption reason for me. It's entered the expiration date down here. However, you'll notice that it has not pre-populated the tax ID field for me. And if I look at the certificate, I can see why that's the case. It's because the tax ID is missing. And if you look at this yellow message just above the certificate, and this is the second and maybe the most valuable thing about the feature, it knows what information is required for a DR13. And in this case, it's telling me that there's a problem with this certificate. So imagine you have an employee, you're reviewing loads of certificates a day. You don't want them to accidentally save this as valid. So you can think of the validation assistant as kind of a tax exemption certificate expert sitting next to your employees, and it knows what should be on a particular certificate, and it's calling out problems as it finds them. Now, we've actually taken this automation a step further. So if a customer uploaded this certificate and the validation assistant determined it to be complete, let's imagine for a second this was a good certificate. There is a setting in ECM where you can tell it, look, if the validation assistant thinks it's a good certificate, I get so many certificates a day, I don't have time to review them all. Just go ahead and automatically save the certificate as valid for me. Maybe not every business wants to enable that feature, but if you're in that situation where you get a high volume of certificates, maybe you're an e-com, you can just have ECM automate the entire process for you. And you can even do it per certificate. So you might want to enable it for Florida resale, but not for Texas agricultural, which is a more complicated certificate, something more complicated. So you don't have to enable it for every certificate, but it is an option for the ones where you want to enable it for it. All right. So I think I've talked enough, and I kind of liked it that we're answering questions there. So why don't I end the demo at that, and we do some more questions.
All right, let's put the poll out here first. So while this poll up, would you like to hear from somebody at Avalara regarding all of the things that we learned today? And let's answer a couple of these questions. I had answered a couple of them directly, but let's talk through this as well. So one of the questions was, does Avalara work with any other vendor management tools that are tracking exemption certificates and W-9s? That is a fantastic question. So we talked an awful lot about exemption certificate management from a customer perspective, but what we didn't talk about is our exemption certificate tool can actually manage the certificates that you issue to your vendors. So that becomes a thing too, of making sure that not anybody and everybody can issue exemption certificates, kind of like that cashier just pushing the button to exempt a transaction. You don't want everybody in your business to be able to issue exemption certificates to vendors. So we've got something that can help with that as well. Do you validate these certificates with the Internal Revenue Service? So exemption certificates for sales tax purposes don't have to be validated with the Internal Revenue Service. They are state specific. That's a great question. Sometimes there's always some confusion about that piece of things. Does ECM access state websites to verify taxpayer information? And as a tax person, my answer for everything is depends. It depends on the states. There are some states that allow this API call to validate taxpayer ID numbers. Other states don't have that functionality, so it really depends on the states and how sophisticated they are. Greg, here's a question you may be able to answer. What is considered a high volume of certificates?
That's a good question, and it probably depends on how many employees you have to review them. But if it's just you and you're getting, I don't know, 100 certificates a day, and you're running the rest of your business on the side, like you don't have a lot of time to go in and review those certificates. And what can happen is they start stacking up, and eventually you go into that incoming certificates queue, and you've got more than you can keep track of. So when I say this tool can be used to help manage that situation, I'm really talking about any business that gets more certificates than they could review per day and ends up sort of looking at the list and thinking, God, I wish we had like at least some way to check them and save them automatically, which is when this would be applicable.
I see a question in here that is fantastic. So here it is. If a customer does not provide exemption certificate at time of transaction, do I need to amend my filing and refund tax, or could I tell my customer to seek refund directly? What an absolutely fantastic question, because one, you told me that you didn't have an exemption certificate, so you didn't exempt that customer. Kudos to you. You didn't have backup, so you didn't exempt them. But then do you have, so now this question is, can I tell the customer I'm not going to refund them and they have to go to the state, or do I refund them and amend the return? You absolutely can tell your customer that you're not going to refund them their money and they have to apply for it from the state. But I don't know of many companies that do it that way, simply because the customer service aspect of things. But you can certainly hold that line, especially if they give it to you months and months and months later, and it's a really big dollar amount, then sure, there's no problem doing that. And then if you decide that you're going to refund them and issue them a credit memo, then technically, yes, you should amend the return where the tax was originally paid. What a fantastic question. Here's another one, and I've never heard of this question before. I've never heard of this scenario before, but let's talk about this one. I had a customer send me a direct pay permit for Texas, but they say it's only for one city. Other cities, they want to be charged sales tax on their invoices. How would that be handled in this situation? A direct pay permit is a direct pay permit. A direct pay permit in Texas doesn't cover just one city. So technically that direct pay permit relates to every single thing that they're buying from you. I've never heard somebody say, hey, don't charge me Houston, but charge me San Antonio. That kind of defeats the purpose of the direct pay permit. And in this instance of how would it be handled in this situation, it actually wouldn't be, because a direct pay permit is a state level that covers all taxes, at least all transactional taxes in the state of Texas. It's not like it's Colorado that wouldn't necessarily apply to Denver, but very interesting that they only want you to apply it to one city. So never heard of that one. We do have a tool, it's called Avalara Tax Research. That would be a great question to ask our group of researchers in Avalara Tax Research, or at least have an easy way to go through and hopefully answer that question. But yeah, typically a direct pay permit isn't for a specific city, it's for the entire state and every jurisdiction within that state. Here's a good one for you, Greg. What does validating an exemption certificate entail? What key details should I be looking for to ensure that it's within regulation?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's part of the advantage of using our AI validation tool is it knows what makes that certificate valid or not. Essentially, you're looking to make sure the certificate is complete. So some certificates will have a lot of fields on them, but not every field is required necessarily. Or sometimes one field will be required depending on how they answered earlier in the certificate. So it's things like that, ensuring that all the correct fields are filled out, If it needs to be signed, you want to make sure it's signed. You might want to accept a certificate just to have it for historical purposes that has expired for a previous transaction, but looking at the expiration date is another thing. You want to make sure it's a current version of the certificate. Sometimes states every couple of years might release a new version of the certificate, so you want to make sure you have the correct one. You can also look at the taxpayer ID. Ideally, you could contact the state through their website. A lot of states have websites where you can verify that the tax ID is correct. We do that for the states that we support, and when we don't do it, we at least verify that the format is correct.
Great question. Here's another one. If a company changes its name, is it supposed to go back and get new exempt forms from their customers? That seems like it would be unreasonable. It is totally unreasonable, but go back to my scenario that I shared. We had changed our name, and think of what an exemption certificate looks like. That certificate was issued to a specific company, and it was issued by a specific company. And that certificate is good as long as those two companies are still the same and continue to do business together. So if you change your name or your customer changes their name, then you need a new certificate. So think about this from a business process perspective is whenever somebody in accounting or customer service changes a customer name in your ERP and that customer is exempt, you should get a new exemption certificate from them, especially if it's changing from like ABC, Inc. to ABC LLC. I mean, an auditor may not be, technically you should still get one, but an auditor may not be that particular about it. But if it's going from ABC to XYZ, I would say, yes, it is very onerous, and I wouldn't call it unreasonable because they're really looking at, hey, this company gave this company an exemption certificate. But now if I've got a document that says, hey, here's an exemption certificate issued to company ABC, but the seller wasn't company ABC, it was XYZ, then there's this misconnect between the documentation and the transaction itself. There's a lot of questions in here about freight forwarders. Let's talk about freight forwarders for a minute. In the state of Florida, I found this to be fascinating myself. In the state of Florida, there are certain areas and addresses that are designated as freight forwarding areas, and you don't actually need an exemption certificate in those areas. So at least from our Avalara tax calculation engine, we recognize those addresses. And even though there's no documentation to exempt a transaction, we would not apply tax to anything that was shipped to that freight forwarding location. And this is where I start to think about what suffices for a freight forwarding, exporting transaction. And it may not necessarily be an exemption certificate that is a state issued form. It may be simply a bill of lading that shows, hey, it's coming to rest here in Texas, and then it's going to be exported. So we talk about ECM as exemption certificate management. It's really document management. It's whatever you think will be acceptable and you are comfortable with keeping as proof of an exemption. So again, it may be a copy of a bill of lading that you use as proof of your exemption that it's going to be exported out of the country. It may be just on a specific exemption certificate. There is a reason that says it's going to be exported. So I want you to think of ECM really as document management. I am storing backup documentation that I considered acceptable to exempt a transaction. Oh, what else we have?
Hey, just to let you know, we're coming up on 1 o'clock.
Oh, we are at time. That an hour flew by so fast. So thank you all very, very much for spending the last hour with us talking about exemption certificates and how AI and automation can help reduce your risk, save yourself some time, those 400 hours a year of managing exemption certificates, and improve the customer experience. We certainly hope that you've learned something today and that you've taken some good things away to help your business be more efficient and in the 21st century into 2026. Thank you all so much for your time, and we look forward to talking with you again soon.
Thank you, everyone. And just a friendly reminder on those housekeeping items, if you qualified for CPE credit today, you should be able to download that certificate now. And as a reminder, you'll also be receiving a post-event email within the next 24 hours, which will take you back to this console to view the recording, the additional resources and slide deck. But if we didn't get to your question today, then somebody from our team will be able to, will be sure to reach out to you. But yes, as Christine mentioned, thank you so much for attending, and I hope everybody has a great rest of your day.